Shalom, shalom to the house of Israel. We start off first and foremost by giving all honor, all glory, all praises to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Harakakudash. Double honors to the apostles, prophets, and teachers of Great Millstone, our spiritual fathers who rule well, teach well. Peace and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwat who follow this truth in all diligence and all sincerity. This is not a black Hebrew Israelite teaching. We never was, nor will we ever be associated with the black Hebrew Israelite movement. We have never taught that all Israelites are black. We know and we have taught that the scriptures say that the heritage of the Lord is unto him as a speckled bird. You're going to have Israelites looking like so-called heathens or those of the other nations because we were scattered among them. With that being said, this lesson is going into, the Apostle Paul, using his power as a man of the Lord to bring judgment upon his own fellow Israelites. Right? So it's not unlawful to do so. Many persons would tell you, hey, you're supposed to, love your brother. And the love they're talking about is to tolerate the nonsense, not to correct him. But there are situations when you look in the scriptures and to the examples that I will bring, you're going to see that, it is indeed lawful. There are situations that is indeed lawful to pronounce judgment against your brother. Right? Now, this is 1 Timothy chapter 1. I'm reading from verse 18 to verse 20. It says, "This charge I commit unto thee, son Timothy, according to the prophecies which went before on thee, that thou by them mightest war a good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience, which some having put away concerning faith have made shipwreck. Of whom Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have delivered unto Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme." Now, we're going to go into scriptures to show you who Hymenaeus and Alexander was and what they did. But before we do that, look at what the scriptures clearly said. That Hymenaeus and Alexander was delivered unto Satan by Paul, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Right? Now, let's read this in the GNT to help you get a little better understanding. So this is in the GNT. It says from verse 18, "Timothy, my child, I entrust to you this command, which is in accordance with the words of prophecy spoken in the past about you. Use those words as weapons in order to fight well." And this is why the scripture, the precept would come to mind. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through power to the pulling down of strongholds. What do we use to pull down the strongholds of the enemy? We use this truth. We use the scriptures, right? So not all fights are fights fought with weapons, with literal swords, literal knives, literal pew-pews. There is a fight that exists where you fight with the words of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. This is why the scripture talks about putting on the breastplate, the helmet, the feet shod, the sword of the spirit, things like that. Those are weapons, designed for war. But there is a spiritual connotation to those literal physical things. So Timothy is being encouraged by Paul, his spiritual father. Use those words as weapons in order to fight well. It says, and keep your faith and a clear conscience. Some people have not listened to their conscience, Slakia, and have made a ruin of their faith. You know, that small, still voice that pointing out to them the erring or the going off, right? They're not using the truth of the scriptures, which shows them they're going off, right? Verse 20, it says, among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have punished. It becomes necessary as men of the Lord to punish those of our own people. This is why Yahushua said, those that would not have me reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. So my question is, do you think it's only the heathens who don't want Yahushua reign over them? 2/3 of our people don't want to submit to Yahushua. So you think they will not be among the casualties? Isn't that Yahushua punishing them through his servants, through the elect? Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have punished by handing them over to the power of Satan. This will teach them to stop their blasphemy. So he handed them over to the power of Satan, that spiritual being Satan. Because Satan, there are powers given to Satan to test, to prove, and to carry out the judgment of the Lord upon people. You know, the scripture talk about spirits created for vengeance. Satan is one such spirit, spiritual being Satan. And Paul delivered them to Satan, right? This will teach them to stop their blasphemy. This is why you go through trials and tribulation, affliction. It's the chastisement of Yahweh for the wrongs or the evils that you have done. And this is why, if you adopt the position to say, but I innocent, I don't deserve it, the scripture says, you know, if you don't endure chastening or chastising as a son, then you are no longer a son, but a bastard. Because whom the Lord loveth, he chastens. And Yahweh has many means in which he chastens his children. And Hymenaeus and Alexander were Jews. They were Jews that were wicked, that came up against Paul, came up against the apostles, and came against the truth of the scriptures. They came against Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai as well. So when they see us preaching and we calling and we condemning the so-called pastors of the so-called black churches, who most of them are Israelites, we ain't doing no wrong. When we say, hey, may the judgment of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai be upon you, may the Lord end all your life, or whatever we say, it's according to righteousness. We are not saying it to be malicious, spitefully malicious. We speak in the truth because we have examples in the scriptures of such things being lawful to do. Let's get 2 Timothy, because what I want to do, I want to show you Hymenaeus' transgression. So 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 15 to 19. It says, study to show thyself approved unto power, a workman that needed not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. But shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto more ungodliness. And their word will eat as doth a canker, of whom is Hymenaeus and Philetus. Right? Now, if you know what a canker is, it's a sore. Right? So what the scriptures is doing is likening vain babbling, vain babblings, false doctrine, to a canker or a sore. and you listening to those vain doctrines, these off philosophies by men who present them, is equivalent to you seeing the bacteria on your face to give you a canker sore, and you're doing nothing about it. You're doing nothing to treat it, nothing to ensure that you don't get it. It says, verse 17 and 18 again, it says, and their word will eat as doth a canker, of whom is Hymenaeus and Philetus, who concerning the truth have erred, saying that the scripture telling you how they erred, who concerning the truth have erred, saying that the resurrection is past already, and overthrew the faith of some. So because of what they taught, they caused persons to stop believing. They placed stumbling blocks in the way of the brethren. This is what slave plantation Christianity is doing. They are speaking things and overthrowing the faith. And this is why a lot of you find Christianity more tolerable than this truth. Because Christianity, they don't outrightly condemn any transgression or any sin. They teach love in spite of it. Love them in spite of it. God hates the sinner, but he loves the sinner. And they can't produce that nowhere in the Bible. And this is verse 19. It says, nevertheless, the foundation of power standeth sure, having this seal. The Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai knoweth them that are his, and let everyone that nameth the name of a Mashiach depart from iniquity. But sadly, there are those of our people who make iniquity and transgression the covering. They enjoy it. They willingly practice the darling sins that they treasure. Now let me get this in the GNT. Let's see what it says. Right. Let's see. 2 Timothy 2:15. Just reading it in the GNT. It says, do your best to win full approval in power's sight, as a worker who is not ashamed of his work, one who correctly teaches the message of power's truth. Keep away from profane and foolish discussions which only drive people further away from power. That's why certain discussions, it unfruitful. It's vain because this person is a heretic. Even when the information is shown and proven to them, what do? They reject it, they fight against it. And not only that, they teach it to others and cause others to err as well. Verse 17, such teaching is like an open sore that eats away the flesh. Two men who have taught such things are Hymenaeus and Philetus. They have left the way of truth, meaning they turn away from the glorious light of truth, and are upsetting the faith of some believers by saying that our resurrection has already taken place. So they were teaching something contrary to sound doctrine. They tried to make the truth of the scriptures a lie and cause many to turn away from the faith. They caused many to become unbelievers. This is why Paul constantly said, continue thou in the things which thou hast learned, confident in whom you have learned it from. They were overturning the confidence of the people in the doctrine delivered to them by the chosen apostles of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. And that is a grave transgression. And such a transgression is what led Paul to deliver them to Satan that they may not blaspheme. This is a serious thing, people. Verse 19, but the solid foundation that power has laid cannot be shaken. That's why the scripture says you can't do nothing against the truth, but for the truth. And on it are written these words, The Lord, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, knows those who are his, and those who say that they belong to the Lord must turn away from wrongdoing. This is why the scriptures say, put away the evils of your doings from before mine eyes. Cease to do evil. You can't profess. You can't profess to be a son and a servant of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai while simultaneously practicing evil and doing the things that he expressly forbids. You know what you call that? Being a hypocrite. And hypocrites have no place with Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. Let's get, I read what Hymenius did, right? Let's get to Alexander now. Let's go to Acts. Acts chapter 19. And we're going to read from verses 20 to 34. Just so you could understand. Right? I'll just highlight it here. Alexander was condoning the worship of idol gods. So this is Acts chapter 19 from verse 20. It says, so mightily grew the word of power and prevailed. After these things were ended, Paul purposed in the Spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I have been there, I must also see Rome. So he sent into Macedonia 2 of them that ministered unto him, right? Timotheus and Erastus. They were disciples of Paul, or students of Paul. But he himself stayed in Asia for a season. And the same time there arose no small stir about that way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen, whom he called together with the workmen of like occupation. Whom he called together with the workmen of like occupation, and said, sirs, you know that by this craft we have our wealth. So these artisans were creating effigies and statues honoring the goddess Diana, which is a what? A pagan deity, right? She belonged to the Greek pantheon of gods. And they got wealth, or they were able to become wealthy through that trade, right? Verse 26, moreover, ye see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul had persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands. Because the scripture say the gods of these nations are idols, and idols are effigies or statues made with hands. Verse 27, so that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Now this is why history is important. Going back to Maccabees and these other scriptures will show you that idol worship was forced among the children of Israel to worship the Greek pantheon of gods. This is how we became heathens. This is how we became Gentiles. But persons would ignore that history. It says, and when they heard these sayings, they were full of wrath and cried, saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. And the whole city was filled with confusion. And having caught Gaius and Aristarchus, men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater. And when Paul would have entered in unto the people, the disciples suffered him not. And certain of the chief of Asia, which were his friends, sent unto him, desiring that he would not adventure himself into the theater. Because why? These people were real angry at Paul, to the point so that they were willing to unalive him. Some therefore cried one thing, and some another, for the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not wherefore they were come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude. Salakia for that, folks. That was a phone call, important. Continuing on, reading over verse 33. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander beckoned with the hand, and would have made his defense unto the people. But when they knew that he was a Jew, all with one voice, about the space of 2 hours, cried out, Great is Diana of Ephesus. Right? So, just now, give me a second. So, thus, this is one of the offenses. You know, they put him forward as the, how to put it, the mouthpiece for the people, while simultaneously he didn't condemn what they were doing in regards to Paul. Right? And let's precept that with 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 14, which says, Of these things put them in remembrance, charging them before the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, that they strive not about words to no profit, but to the subverting of the hearers. And let's get that in the GNT, 2 Timothy 2:14. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 14, it says, Remind your people of this, and give them a solemn warning in power's presence not to fight over words. It does no good, but only ruins the people who listen. So, based on that whole conference coming together to want to bring charges against Paul, because Paul was preaching to the Jews that dwelt in Ephesus, to turn away from following these false gods and to turn back to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. And you see in those people, refusal to do so. And those who were aware of the truth, not openly condemning or being in agreement to what Paul was doing. So this is 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 14 and 15. And then we go end this part, call it part 1, and we'll go into part 2. It says, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 14 and 15. It says, Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil. Now, this is why when I was reading the account, it talked about the artisans. It wasn't just the silversmith. It was men of same trade, the craftsmen, those who were making effigies or statues to their great goddess Diana. So Alexander was a coppersmith. Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil. The Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai reward him according to his works, of whom be thou aware also, for he had greatly withstood my words. So everything that Paul was speaking about in regards to the Jews to turn away from idolatry and serving these gods, because these gods are not our gods and these gods are not gods at all. These craftsmen, Alexander being, chosen, when you look at it as the main speaker on behalf of these people, he knowing what the truth was, he didn't condemn it. He actually came against Paul. right? So I would end this part here, right? Because to make the lessons more palatable and have a shorter time frame, because Jakes have a very short attention span, it has become necessary to do lessons in this format. So Akim and Akwat and my brother Abinaya saying tune in for part 2 of this lesson. Shalom.